Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Sky Sports F1 podcast brought to you by Dropbox. I'm Matt Baker, and to help me look back on a chaotic weekend out in Qatar and look ahead to this week's season finale in Abu Dhabi, I'm joined by Karun, Chandhok and Naomi Schiff. Hello to both of you. Naomi, I'm going to start with you. You were on the ground this weekend out in Qatar. Sprint weekends are always busy. I felt like though on Sunday we got loads of talking points for the debrief, didn't we? It was a bonkers race.
It was. First of all, hi, Matt. Hi, Karun. And hello to the listeners, of course. Qatar, yes. Wow. What a very different weekend to what it was last season. A lot cooler. First of all, we were freezing out there, which is hard to believe considering last year we were all falling over because it was so hot. But yes, so many things to talk about between decisions with race control, race director, stewards giving out pretty harsh penalties, Ferrari closing the gap a little bit to McLaren, so that keeps the battle going on until Abu Dhabi, and then of course Alpine switching out Ocon at the very last minute. So those are just some of them to talk about, but there was lots going on in Qatar.
There certainly was. We're going to come on to all of those topics in a little bit. Karun, how are you? I mean, end of the season. I mean, you weren't obviously out in Qatar, but we've got one race to go. You're raising your arms in celebration. Has it flown by for you?
It has flown by. It's slightly worrying how little I remember of races, until we sort of prepare for an episode or review or a column or something. And you start to read things up and you go, oh God, Fernando Alonso qualified fourth in Saudi Arabia. Like you just forget. I mean, I was there. I was in the commentary box at that point. So it's
because there's so many races now, aren't there, Karun? It's hard to remember everything that's happened.
Yeah, exactly. And with the sprints as well, it's like, you just forget, don't you, how much has happened this season. But yeah, it's been a great year from where we started off to where we've ended up. I think we've had a great year. And Qatar was almost symptomatic of that, wasn't it? It started off a bit of excitement in the opening lap. Then it was pretty dull for a whole chunk in between. And then it started to go nuts. So it was on the whole fascinating, but lots going on outside the cars as well, wasn't there, with all the penalties and the FIA and all that stuff?
Certainly was. Almost the out-of-car stuff is just as interesting, isn't it, at the moment? Certainly looking ahead to the next few years. Here's what's coming up. We're going to talk about a few big talking points from the race. One of those being Lando Norris's very costly penalty. We'll also ask if it was the right call to put out the safety car or not to put out the safety car for at least 3 laps while Alex Albon's wing mirror was in the pit straight. We'll get into Lewis Hamilton's form and whether or not Ferrari should be a bit concerned ahead of next season. We'll talk about the war of words between George Russell and Max Verstappen. And if that wasn't enough, we'll ask if this weekend is going to be the last weekend for Red Bull with Sergio Perez, and talk, like Naomi mentioned, about Jack Doohan taking over from Esteban Ocon at Alpine. I was going to say Haas, but not Alpine. It's definitely Alpine.
Not just yet.
Shall we get into a few of the talking points then from inside the race? And I guess the first question, look, Karun, we'll get your thoughts on this first, just because we haven't heard from you yet this weekend. A lot of fans will have seen that wing mirror from Alex Albon be in the middle of the pit straight, right? It's in the braking zone if you were overtaking into turn 1. Why on earth did a safety car not come out in those first few laps? Why did it take Valtteri Bottas to obliterate it into 1,000 pieces, to get punches for Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton? Why did it take that long for the safety car to come out, do you think?
I think it's a very good question, and I'm not convinced we got a clear answer from the FIA on that. They sort of put out this explanation of their decision-making process, but it was all sort of a bit vague, if I'm honest. There wasn't a clear reasoning behind it. Obviously it's the second weekend of the new race director, Rui Marquez, whose decision it is of whether to deploy the safety car or a virtual safety car or yellow or single or double yellow. At the end of the day, I have a lot of sympathy for him because it's an incredibly tough job. It's an incredibly high-pressure job. But for some reason, he was forced to do F1, F2, and somebody I hear say he also did F1 Academy at the weekend. So I'm not sure if that's true, Naomi. I don't know if you heard that on the ground, but
I did hear it on the ground, but I'm not sure that it is true. From what I heard, it was F2 and F1. So
okay, so even if he's doing just F2 and F1 on a sprint weekend, incredibly busy, Very odd in that respect. I personally, in that instance, I was watching at home. I saw the mirror. I thought we're going to get a VSC. We've seen it on many occasions in the past that a VSC was deployed. Now, they said that the VSC wouldn't have worked because the field was so spread out. I mean, I had a little look back on the track map on the replay, so we could see the live positioning of where the cars were. And I do think, in reality, if you look at where the mirror was, you needed a marshal from the end of the pit lane to scooch 10 steps out, pick up the mirror, and come back. Matt, you're a quicker runner than both of us. I reckon you could probably get that done in 7 seconds.
Well, it's also one item, isn't it? It's not a host of debris, is it? It's just literally one wing mirror in the pit straight.
Yeah, and I think under VSC, there would have been a gap somewhere, is my personal opinion. So I was very surprised that we didn't see a VSC straight away to get that cleared out.
Similar to Kareem was watching it at home, and a lot of fans on Twitter were saying very similar things. Like, it doesn't take an expert to work out that an object on a fast track is going to cause an issue at some point, particularly in the location that it was in. So is it? I mean, from a safety point of view, cars going that fast at that point in the track, surely it should have been called earlier, or at least been taken off the track in whatever way that looked like.
So, first of all, yes, I do agree that something should have been done earlier. They shouldn't have waited until Valtteri drove over it and essentially, burst it into thousands of little pieces that ended up potentially causing those 2 punctures. But you've got to also look at it in the sense that whilst there is an object on track, I think the position wasn't as bad as it seems. The only thing that was unfortunate about the position that was in, not so much from a danger perspective, because there is a lot of visibility. It's a flat track. It's quite a wide track. So the drivers may not have been able to pinpoint exactly where it was, but it was in an area where they were clearly not driving on it. It wasn't on the racing line. The only issue is for Qatar, that is basically your only overtaking opportunity. So had there not have been an issue where, Valtteri drives over it, we then have the next sequence of events that play out. If that wouldn't have happened, then what would have been the solution? Because they were just kind of hoping that as the race went on, the gaps would slightly change to give them that opportunity to put out the VSC and have that gap that they were saying they didn't have for the marshal to get through. But I guess, we feel a little bit that the FIA is being slightly defensive, being a little bit cautious about the moves that they're making because of everything that's been going on behind the scenes. And you want them to be able to almost apply the rules and apply the way that they make those decisions without looking at what's actually going on in the race situation. I think they wanted to let them keep going until, that gap was created so that people wouldn't necessarily be affected too much by their decision because they thought a safety car was too dramatic for the situation, but the VSC wasn't necessarily possible. So it feels like that may be sort of influencing a little bit what goes on. Sometimes it's just the luck of the draw, whether you put a safety car in that moment or not. I just felt like they were a bit defensive and cautious about the moves that they were making all weekend long. So it was a tough situation for them to be in, a tough call, but I think one should have certainly been made earlier.
But I think when it comes to the penalty for Lando, Matt, which is...
Good segue, Karun.
I suspect was going to be your next question. I preempted it and saved you some time on the podcast. I think the reality is, yes, by the rule book, it's in the rules. Don't slow down for double wave yellow. It's a 10-second stop-go, which is very, very harsh. And for me personally, I think that's something that perhaps needs to be reviewed for 2025. It's too late to change for this weekend. Because a double wave yellow, like Naomi said, on a big, flat, wide open track where there's loads of space, debris on track or something like that, is completely different to when you've got a blind corner at Monte Carlo with narrow barriers and you don't have visibility around the corner. So, I think back, if you look, you rewind the clock. So, Matt, you probably won't remember, you were 5 years old in 1997. Jacques Villeneuve, in the Japanese Grand Prix got excluded because he accumulated points. He had a suspended ban coming in for not slowing down under double wave yellows. Exactly that, not lifting. He kept it flat, and they tried to appeal it, and he got excluded from the Japanese Grand Prix. So this goes back a long way. This rule, it's not a recent rule. It's not lifting off under double wave yellows. But then we've also seen instances. Mika Hakkinen comes to mind in Monaco '99, where there was a yellow. He put his hand up to say, I acknowledge the yellow, and he still carried on, but he didn't get penalized, right? So I think that's what the stewards are looking for. And I mean, let's be honest, when you look at the telemetry and you listen to the lift that Max made, it's the tiniest of lifts.
Is that?
Yeah, it's the tiniest of lifts. So whether he had hit that mirror at, I'm going to guess a number and say, I don't know, 320 kilometers an hour or 307 kilometers an hour, the impact was significant, right? But it's the fact that he showed that, look, I'm aware of it, I acknowledge it, etc., etc. So I think that's where there's got to be maybe just some degree of subjectivity where the stewards are able to say, okay, in this case, it was on a big wide open straight. There's no marshals on the track. There's no digger on the track. There's no cars stopped on the racing line, etc., etc. Instead of the stop-go, we'll do 10 seconds of added race time, which I think, if you listen to Andreas Taylor, he's talking about it being a disproportionate penalty. I think if they said a 10-second race time added, that would have been proportionate. But equally, as I said, I don't blame the stewards because that's what's in the rules now. I'm just saying the rules need to be reviewed for next year.
Yeah, it could have very real implications, couldn't it, in the Constructors' Championship, because there's only 21 points now heading into Abu Dhabi between McLaren in first and Ferrari in second. And I wonder, Naomi, if the point of all of this, the wider point, is that yet again, we've spoken many times on this podcast about we should almost rebrand this podcast to be the FIA discussion podcast. Did they get everything right that weekend? We seem to be talking week on week about issues within the FIA, governance in the sport. You know, George Russell's been speaking, hasn't he? Head of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, about who's going to be fired next. We've lost a race director. We've lost a compliance officer. We've lost stewards. The list goes on. Toto Wolff saying the FIA could have its own reality show. I mean, it's not, I guess the wider point, as I say, it's not a good look for the sport, is it? That this is what we're focusing on in the weeks after a race.
I agree. It's not what you want to be talking about after a race weekend. But, you know, I've also, something that's kind of been sparked as an idea in my mind with all of this conversation was, you know, be careful what you wish for, because whilst the FIA were strict and they were harsh and, you know, whatever you want to say about them, they were applying the penalties that were necessary for the crimes on track. And the drivers have been asking for consistency. So if we start saying, well, could you look at the situation on track and sort of slightly apply a different scenario, then you will always end up with a scenario where it's always going to be like end up at the steward's discretion, which is what the drivers are trying to minimize as much as possible by having them consistently apply penalties for rules that are written down in a rule book. Now, as Karun says, should those rules slightly be tweaked? Absolutely. Are the decisions that are being made initially by race control the right ones? Potentially not always. In this particular scenario with the double wave yellow, again, did Lando not lift? He didn't. Therefore, he got the 10-second penalty. But should the double wave yellow have been there to begin with? That's another question. I think if you look at, as Karun was saying, whether Max lifted or not, the double wave yellow is there to say there is danger on track. Be prepared to stop. That's how severe a double wave yellow should be taken, or how seriously it should be taken. So let's say theoretically someone is, a marshal is down in turn one for whatever reason. He's trying to get something, he's stuck, who knows. Double wave yellow, people should theoretically not just lift, they should be prepared to stop, change direction, whatever it may be. In this case, even Max's little lift wouldn't have been enough to, you know, take precautions that were maybe necessary. So there is, you know, the balance of what that double wave yellow should really look like, because how do you measure what a good enough lift is, or how much a speed difference is good enough? So there are things that need to change in the rule book. On the FIA topic, I think they're being, you know, they all have their backs up against the wall at the moment with a lot of people being let go at the FIA. I think everyone is afraid of making the wrong decision, and sometimes that defensive behavior leads you to make the wrong call sometimes. But what is the bigger picture? You know, what needs to really make those people feel secure, and what can the FIA and the drivers together do to make those rules more accurate to what really goes on track?
Karun, do you think the changes that are being made by the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, are making the sport better at the moment?
Which changes? I guess is the question.
Well, I mean, all of the hirings and firings. Yeah, it is, I guess, because you could make sense of it. You could, you know, no one would mind if these were making the sport better. But I guess you then have to ask the question, is it making it better? Because if it's not, then it's just creating drama and headlines and unnecessary distractions, isn't it? Away from the reason why we're all here, which is Formula One racing, not discussing the rules.
Yeah, and I think ultimately we've all spent a lot of time discussing, racing rules and the guidelines and all this sort of stuff for the last few months, haven't we? And way too much time and energy discussing who's coming and going within the governing body. The list of people who've left, either being fired or left the governing body on their own accord in the last 12 months, I guess, is pretty long. It's not a short list when you go back to Steve Nielsen, back in the last year. So there's been a lot going on. Is it for the better? It's tough to answer, isn't it? Because I think we need stability. That's what I think. And so in that case, it's not been good having so much chopping and changing going on. I think we've spent a lot of time and energy in the last 2 years, and it could be from wherever within the governing body, talking about driver jewelry and underpants and swearing and this sort of stuff. But actually, the driver guidelines showed that there was there are holes within and loopholes that are being exploited, and that's bad for racing, right? And in fact, what we should be spending energy on that stuff to make the racing and the sport better. And I think so to me, I think ultimately there needs to be a focus on what is the big picture here, and the big picture is to make the motor racing better and more fan friendly, and we want to be able to have the races settled on the track and not in the stewards' rooms.
All right, let's move on to talk. Well, funnily enough, about stewards' rooms. With the beef.
What, more?
Inverted commas, more stewards. Yeah, well, never ends, does it? The beef between Max Verstappen and George Russell, which has sort of started to emerge, hasn't it, this weekend? Verstappen has criticised Russell for the role he played in getting him demoted from pole to second on the grid for the Qatar Grand Prix. He's since come out and said he's lost all respect for George Russell. We learned from Christian Horner, a conversation you were part of, Naomi, that there was a little bit of a moment between the two of them on the trailer as they go around the circuit. Max felt things went a bit too far yesterday. So, Naomi, I actually want to ask you the question, like from the outside, in terms of Formula One, right? Is it not all about trying to find a fault or a problem with your opponent and then reporting them to the stewards? That's in the DNA of Formula One. Dare I say, it's exactly what Max Verstappen did to Lando when he didn't lift off. He was straight on the radio and said, "Oh, hold on a minute, didn't Lando not lift off?" So what is the difference between what George is doing in the stewards' room and what Max is doing?
Yeah, look, 100%. Drivers and, the whole pit wall, the whole engineering team, they're always going to be looking to see what things other than what's just happening on track drivers are doing, let's say in the heat of a battle. Further than that, they'll be looking to see where is a team making a mistake, whether that's in the pit lane, in the pit box, during the pit stop. Everyone's always trying to find an error that your opposition is committing. But the fact of the matter is, what happened with Max and George, now whilst there's never been very much love lost between the two of them, I think this really was, the last nail in the coffin. Because what George essentially did there, and I want to say what George did there, in this scenario, let's take it back to Grand Prix qualifying. George already knows that there's 2 cars up ahead of him that are on slow laps as well, because he was also on a cool down lap, but he was preparing his tires for the next lap. So he's aware that there are 2 cars ahead of him slowing down. Max is also aware at one point that Stroll is behind him. He then lets him pass and knows that George is also coming, but is told that he's on a slow lap. So nobody in this scenario feels that they're going to compromise the driver behind them because they're all theoretically in the same situation. As we've said before, this is quite a flat track with great visibility. So you can see quite far down the road where the next car is. So it took us all a little bit by surprise that George was so caught out by where Max was, the speed he was going when he approached him. And George obviously immediately reported that as being dangerously slow. You could see it was sort of like an exaggerated loss of the car, went off a little bit, touched the gravel, and then he immediately said it over the radio, and then this whole scenario plays itself out. Now, the issue is, whilst you go into the steward's room as drivers and defend your case, and it's a little bit like being in the principal's office or like in a courtroom, everyone's got to sort of plead their case. You're always going to do what's in favor of yourself, right? You're never going to just hand it over to the other driver. But within reason, I think, is the issue here. It's like within reason, because I think what George has essentially done by making this out to be a bigger offense than what it really was, it opens up the door for other drivers to do essentially the same thing, drive fast up to a car that's on a slow lap in front of them and make it seem like they're driving slowly to force them into an error. So that's what we don't want to see. And I think we obviously were not in the stewards room. We don't know exactly what was said. We don't know what George said. We don't know what Max said. And therefore, it's really difficult to know how far George went in terms of what between racing drivers is respectable or not. But it seems that whatever happened or whatever went down in there, Max is no longer, he said quite clearly he doesn't want anything to do with George anymore. So it's got to have been a step further than what we've seen in the past.
It's strong, isn't it? I guess, Karun, perhaps is this a little precursor to perhaps a championship battle in the future? You know, George looks like he's really got under Max's skin with this.
Oh,
and if
Matthew,
you compare it... No?
Spot stirrer.
I thought you were going to disagree with me then. I was like, no, I think he has got under his skin, yeah. But
No.
look, he's got under his skin. And I'm just allow me to maybe compare it to, say, Lando Norris this year. They've been in a championship battle, but Max, I think you could argue, has had kind of the upper hand on Lando psychologically. Like he hasn't given Lando an inch. He's pushed him off track, whatever. Whereas I just feel like, is George just kind of getting in there a bit? And like, if this does go to a championship battle in the future, he's able to rile him up a little bit?
No, I really don't think that's what's going on here. I think what's happened is, you know, and I've been up with the stewards room my fair share of my career. You go up there and you make your case, right? You make your case for something you've either done wrong or you had something done wrong to you. And I think, you know, just listening to what Max was saying and speaking to a couple of people, you know, who were sort of around there, it sounds like he thought George was over-exaggerating the point, and really, in reality, it was two drivers on slow laps, and it didn't really affect anything, right? It didn't affect grid positions, it didn't change anything. And Max is kind of like, look, I get it, fine, I was on the racing line, yeah, you were going quicker than me, yeah, I could have gone off the line a bit more, but it wasn't like I tried to fire you off into the grandstand. And I think he felt that the way that George was sort of making the case made it seem like Max was trying to fire him off, you know, into the top of one of the Doha skyscrapers. and I think that's what upset him, is he was like, it just felt disproportionate the way that the argument was being made. I think that just annoyed him and he tipped. So, listen, I throughout the season, I think we've been on the podcast and discussed a couple of times, you know, is Max under pressure? Is he feeling the pressure? And I've always poo-pooed that. I'm not a subscriber to that. I think he has the moments of road rage, and I think he has the moments of where things upset him and anger him, and I think this was one of them, definitely. You know, Mexico Turn 8 with Lando, again, it was a moment of road rage. But I think that the concept of him feeling the pressure of one of those drivers in a championship battle, I just don't think that's the case. I think, you know, he has moments where the red mist comes down and he, you know, acts, let's say, irrationally.
Now, before we get on to talk about Lewis Hamilton's final race with Mercedes in Abu Dhabi, a quick word on our podcast sponsor, Dropbox. In Formula One, it's all about teamwork and timing. For the McLaren Formula One team, this involves more than 1,200 individuals working together seamlessly, making split-second decisions on the track and digging into terabytes of data between races to prep for the next one. Every millisecond counts, and collaboration is everything. That's where Dropbox, McLaren's official technology partner, comes in. With Dropbox Dash, the team can find and manage everything they need across their work apps, boosting their speed and focus where it matters. Fancy seeing how teamwork and technology helps fuel the McLaren Formula One team's success? Visit dropbox.com/McLaren-F1 for your exclusive behind-the-scenes look. All right, shall we move on? We've got a good pace, guys. We've got a good pace. We're rattling through all these stories. Let's talk about Lewis Hamilton, because it is going to be his final race with the Mercedes team this weekend in Abu Dhabi. And well, to say the least, it's been a tough season for him. It was a very, very tough Qatar Grand Prix, getting 2 penalties, finishing 12th. He struggled badly in qualifying, hasn't he, recently, failing to make the top 5 at each of the last 5 races, twice not even featuring in the top 10. So I kind of posed the question, Naomi, I'll start with you on this. How worried would Fred Vasseur be, and John Elkann, the Ferrari chairman, be about Lewis Hamilton's form with Mercedes and this sort of tail off and dip towards the end of the season? Do you think they're sitting there being worried about next year?
I think it would only be natural for them to be looking, to the garage next door and wondering what's going on. They've obviously put a lot of money towards getting Lewis over. I think there's a lot of excitement around Lewis Hamilton coming to Ferrari, and it's all this big deal of, these iconic brands coming together to hopefully do something sensational together. So yes, of course, Ferrari will look over and have a level of concern. But I think in Formula One specifically, but in motorsport in general, we so quickly forget, the good things. You very quickly, and Checo is always the one to say it, you're as good as your last result. And sometimes we move on too quickly and we're too influenced by what's happening in the here and the now and forget a lot of the good stuff. It's been really challenging seasons for Lewis with this set of regulations. They've had a car that's been really difficult to contend with. And for him to have gone since Abu Dhabi 2021 to Silverstone this year without a win, in itself, you got to wonder what mindset or what place Lewis is at in his head. We saw the emotional outpouring at Silverstone from Lewis, showing that, he had doubts about himself at points over the last 2-3 years. And of course, everybody's wondering what's happened to the Lewis Hamilton we know, the one that's, always got something extra up his sleeve in qualifying, that's just, quick and delivers. But, he did win in Silverstone. He was really quick in Vegas, and that was just a race ago. And it seems that so quickly we get deterred by a result, but also Lewis is quite publicly saying, I'm just not quick anymore. So I think, that's more to do with the fact that he's a little bit man down at the moment. And I believe that if Lewis is given a competitive car and he has something truly to fight for, I do think we'll see that spark come back. But the question is, will it be enough? And until he's in that position, we won't know. So I think Ferrari have just got to be concerned about the things that they can control, making sure that they provide a car that's competitive for both of their drivers. And once Lewis is there, they'll be able to tackle the situation with whatever information they have in front of them at the time. But absolutely, there'll be a level of concern, but I'm sure that they'll be reasonable about it and wait until he's there to really draw any conclusions.
Any regrets, Karun, do you think, about announcing in January and having a whole year to kind of do this long goodbye that's actually ended up being not, he's won obviously this year, hasn't he? So in many senses it's been a success, but for a 7-time world champion, winning is not enough. It's got to be championship battles, hasn't it? I wonder if the timing of the announcement might have maybe not been the best idea. I don't know if you agree.
I don't think he's regretting going because Ferrari are on the up. I think Ferrari have done a really good job this year. They're sort of loosely in touch for the Constructors' Championship, and okay, it's still McLaren's to lose, but I think Ferrari still have an outside chance, and Mercedes are nowhere close. So you'd have to say, on recent form, he's made the right choice. The timing of it, I actually think it's been good. He doesn't have this distraction of his future weighing on his mind throughout the season. He's been able to start the season knowing where he's going next and just get on with the job. Unfortunately, the qualifying pace has been a real worry. He's down 23-6 to George, including the sprint qualifying. That is massive. For a driver who's taken over 100 pole positions, that is massive. And personally, I think it's going to be a problem in 2025, unless he can rediscover the qualifying form. I don't know whether John Elkann and Fred Vasseur are worried, but I think Lewis would be worried, because if he qualifies 5 places behind Leclerc, and next year, if you're 2/10 off, it can be 4-5 places. We've seen this year with George, he's often being, a little bit off, and then he's 3-4 places. We talked about Vegas there. Yeah, he had an outstanding race, and Fred Vasseur quickly pointed that out. But in qualifying, he still made 2 mistakes, and was George who got pole. And if Lewis hadn't have made those mistakes, he would have won that race. I think he had amazing race pace. So there's no doubt about it. On a Sunday, the magic is still there. We saw it at Silverstone. We see it in places like Barcelona as well, where it's sort of been under the radar. The magic is still there on a Sunday. But his qualifying form is a real worry. Now, whether they use the old car testing that they're going to do with a 2022 or a 2023 car to then just go out there and give him loads of new tire qualifying runs to try and just build his confidence back up, because he seems extraordinarily low on confidence when it comes to qualifying, which again is bizarre to see, but it's true. And Ferrari need to be proactive, I think, in terms of rebuilding his confidence before the season in Melbourne.
Naomi, as a non-driver, I sit here and I'm curious to know, how hard is it going to be for Lewis to make the switch to Ferrari? Just in terms of, look, he's been at Mercedes for 12 seasons now. He's so used to how they work and how they operate. And what challenges is he going to have in the very short off season before next season?
I think it's going to be a big challenge. I mean, if you put the driving aside, because obviously that's what comes second nature to these drivers. It's all they know is driving cars, and there will be a level of adaptability getting into the new colors, the new car. But when it comes to the team, I think that's probably going to be the biggest shift for Lewis, because he has been with the same team. I think he's very protective of his space, who's around him, how they manage things. So to go from a very safe space where, you know exactly who to go to in each different scenario, you know exactly who you're dealing with, who you're speaking to completely different people who you've mostly not worked with. I think there's a few different faces at Ferrari. Obviously, he's worked with Fred before, and I think there's a number of other people at Ferrari who he has along his career worked alongside. But at the same time, you're also stepping into Charles Leclerc's backyard. I mean, this is a team that's very much been known to say in the past that Charles is their little star. He's the boy that they've put a lot of hopes into for the future of Ferrari, and he's been there for many years, more than Lewis will have been when he gets there. So it's about finding a way to integrate into a new team, but also into a new culture, because Ferrari, we know that a lot of people up and down the paddock, often when there are job availabilities at Ferrari, might not necessarily go because they feel it's very Italian. Obviously, you've got to move to Italy. So there's also the cultural shift that he's going to have to make in fitting into the way that they operate and the way that they manage things. But I have no doubt that, no matter who's involved in it, whether it's Lewis, the team around him personally, and everyone on Ferrari's side, they're going to want to do whatever they can to make him feel comfortable when he gets there, to have the best possible results. Everyone's got the same goal there, and it's for the whole team to succeed. So I don't doubt that it will eventually come right, but it will definitely take some time to fully settle in.
I wonder how much of that has already been taking place behind the scenes. We don't know, but we can only speculate, can't we? Just sort of final point on Lewis, Karun, the emotions that he's going to be feeling on Sunday as the checkered flag goes down, and is it? I mean, potentially it's relief, isn't it? Now, I think perhaps at the end of this season, would you agree?
It's such a shame that is the emotion. I want to see him win one last time, frankly. I want to see him win in Abu Dhabi, and especially in Abu Dhabi. God, the emotional roller coaster he's had in that place, all the successes and then the disaster of 2021. I'd love to see him win there for one last time. So yeah, I hope he doesn't have relief at the end of it. I hope he has joy in terms of one last... Even a podium will be a great way to sign off with the team, I think. It is going to be tough, right? I think, shifting team after you spend a long time with the team is exceedingly difficult. And Lewis says, Naomi raised a good point there. He's never raced with a non-British team, right? I know Mercedes-Benz is German-owned, but the race team is British. And McLaren before that was a British team. So he's not raced in F1 for a non-British team. And there is a big cultural difference in just the way the whole thing operates. Carlos Sainz up sticks and moved to Maranello. He lived down the road from Italy, from the factory, to get stuck in to that whole culture and really work as an integrated part of the team. Charles lives down the road in Monaco, as does Lewis. So I'm not saying he has to move to Italy, but he's got to find a way to really integrate himself into that whole team and their way of working, their way of communicating. English might be the sort of official language of every race team, but it's a bit like when you go to a new job, right? There's the conversations that happen in the meetings, but then there's the conversations that happen around the water cooler, and so much of that bonding with your colleagues and those things that are unsaid in the meetings are so important, right? Anyone in any job can relate to that. So I think that's going to be a challenge, I don't know if he's having Italian lessons over the winter, but
he needs to be having them for sure. Because as you say, Karun, there's those little things that happen, not necessarily on the record in the meetings that, Charles is a fluent Italian speaker, so even if there might end up being a scenario where in which the two of them are battling each other heavily on track and there starts to be, I wouldn't call it a rivalry, but a level of competitiveness between the two of them, and you catch Charles having a conversation with a group of people speaking in Italian, that might get you slightly paranoid. So you'd be better off at least, starting to understand the language, and that will make sure that you don't ever feel left out of those kinds of conversations for sure.
It's just normal, isn't it, being a Formula One driver? Same office politics is all as everyone else experiences. Not really that special. All right, a couple more stories just to discuss. Sergio Perez, we're starting to get hints, I think. Certainly if you listen to Christian Horner, that this might be his last weekend with the team out in Abu Dhabi. Naomi, again, you were there for this conversation out in Qatar. He said what he decides to do, that will be his decision at the end of the day. We've also learned that Helmut Marko has been speaking to Viaplay. He said there is a meeting Monday after Abu Dhabi. All the major people are there, all the shareholders, and there will be a decision done. So Naomi, what was the sense on the ground? Did it feel as though this might start to become a goodbye tour for Sergio Perez?
Yeah, completely. I think we have spoken to Christian Horner on so many occasions this year where we've asked him what is going on with Checo Perez. I think around summertime, just before the summer break, there was whispers of him being replaced during the summer. So we, even ahead of that, preempted sort of trying to have that conversation with Christian. And he's always been incredibly defensive he's always defended Checo in every one of those conversations, to the point where we couldn't even understand why he was defending him so much, because every other driver who's had poor performances at Red Bull's been cut with no hesitation, whereas Checo's been kept for so long and been defended so much by Christian Horner that, to me, there was a stark difference in the way that he spoke to us on Sunday night in Qatar, where he was starting to use past tense when he was talking about Checo, as if he'd already made that decision. And then also to say things like, he's mature enough, wise enough, old enough to make the right decision. It's kind of like they're putting the ball in his park because they want him to go off in a more respectable way by having made the decision himself. So you could totally feel that there was a shift. Something has changed. I don't know if that conversation's been had or not, what paperwork still needs to be done, because obviously he has got a contract until the end of next year. So I don't know if that meeting on Monday post Abu Dhabi is more related to the paperwork and maybe the decision's already been done, because it really did feel in that moment that decision had been made. And ultimately for Checo, to be honest, I don't know how he still turns up to work enjoying it, because it has been such a struggle. I think anybody who goes up against Max Verstappen has a really, really tough job, but he's done it year after year. And there were times where things were a lot closer. He still had some victories. He still had some, pole positions. There was still some glimmer of hope in it all. But for now, it just feels like the longest run of terrible performances, embarrassing moments, and just him trying so hard to turn the situation around. And no matter what they've done to try, it's not worked. So at that point, you ask yourself the question, what's it worth turning up to work? Other than the big, big, big check that you get, the money. The money is obviously a motivator, but, even for us, it's tough. Like, I'm tired of saying negative things about Checo. It's at some point, you don't want to feel like you're constantly kicking a man that's already down, but there is nothing else to say. It's just not been a good season for Checo Perez. And I think he will get to the end of Abu Dhabi and feel that and know that, he's let the team down. They're third in the Constructors' Championship with a car that is not the best. We'll give them that. But it's still Max who's won the majority of the races this season. So I feel for him. I think his time at Red Bull's probably come. I think he's going to feel that. And I think that there's a possibility that decision's already been made, and we'll just wait for him to say it to us in Abu Dhabi.
If this is the last race for Sergio Perez, who would you put in that second seat? Given that second seat basically on the face of it, it's kind of cursed, isn't it, really? Whoever goes in it seems to not have a great time going up against Max, and their career seems to, go a slightly different direction. I mean, I saw one person mention the name Valtteri Bottas. And I don't think that's the craziest idea ever. I mean, he might have already signed to be a reserve driver with Mercedes. I don't know. But, so someone just on a year contract who could go in there, put in some really good performances, potentially, as long as he's not been hurt too much by being at the back of the grid with Sauber. But yeah, look, I mean, who would you see?
I think you need to have a shootout between Tsunoda and Lawson. In a proper way, I think even if it's with the older car, with the testing rules, look, they're two homegrown talents. You think back, I was having a recent conversation with Jonathan Williams, who, Frank Williams' son, who was involved at the shootout that brought Jenson Button into Formula One, and he was expecting. I said, how do you do it? And he said, well, we all went down to Spain to do a test. And you had Button straight out of Formula 3. It finished third in the championship that year, had a strong Macau coming in as a rookie. And he had up against Bruno Junqueira, their homegrown test driver. And we had the shootout, and all the engineers voted. There were 7 engineers there, and they voted 6-1 in favor of Junqueira. And Johnny said, he and Frank were having this conversation around what should we do? And they went, look, the reality is the rate of progress Jenson has made in the short time and will carry on to make is been extremely high compared to Junqueira. And the reason I mention it is look at the scenario here, right? Yes, Yuki's done a fantastic job. Everyone's talking about what a great job Yuki's done this year. And no question about it, he's made a big step forward. But you'd have to say Liam has pretty much matched him for pace. And he is... he's been there or thereabouts as an equal for him, with significantly less mileage, significantly less experience. He's never had a proper pre-season test program where he's just had a chance away from the pressure to, pound round and round and round Barcelona or Bahrain and just be able to hone his skills in a low-pressure environment. Yuki's had all of those opportunities. So to me, if you look at the growth potential, you'd have to say Liam's actually improved and grown more, and that trajectory is going to be higher. But Yuki's got the experience, perhaps, to deal with going up against Max, So I think there are a lot of factors here. But to me, you got 2 in-house homegrown talents, which, you need to have a shootout and make a decision. Overall, I still think they should thank Carlos Sainz. And I've been saying it for months and months and months. I still don't understand why they didn't sign Carlos Sainz, but I still don't understand why they can't, how much have they lost? Probably over 20 million by finishing third instead of first in the Constructors' Championship. You could go to Williams, there's got to be some sort of financial deal you could make and just buy Carlos Sainz, because who is the best driver who is not with a top team for 2025? It's Carlos Sainz.
Stranger things have happened, haven't they, in Formula One? But yeah.
And in the Red Bull camp.
Yeah, particularly the Red Bull camp. Time will tell, won't it? I'm sure we'll learn in the days after Abu Dhabi the outcome of that. Right, final, very quickly, bit of driver news, and that is the news that broke on Sunday that Esteban Ocon has raced his last race with Alpine, and Jack Doohan is going to be taking that seat for Abu Dhabi. Really, my only question on this is how strange the timing is. Naomi, I'll come to you on this just because you were there again. But look, they're locked in a constructors' battle, right, between Haas and Alpine. There's 6 points in it. So why would you put that pressure on Jack Doohan to hopefully put in a really good performance in Abu Dhabi? And why would you give Esteban Ocon? To me, it doesn't make sense, but maybe it does to other people. What do you reckon?
Well, look, I agree with you. I'm not sure about whether it makes sense or not. I think that whether it does or doesn't make sense, it's an extremely risky move by Alpine at this stage in the game to throw Jack in it when there's only 5 points between the two teams and they're fighting for 6th place in the constructors' title. So yeah, it's a big move. I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on Jack's shoulders. I can understand why, had the constructors' battle not been on the table, why they would be interested in getting Jack in at this stage, because, Esteban, since Austin, really, if we could, if we exclude Brazil, has really been struggling with the car. He's been very vocal about that, to the point where he feels that they're definitely prioritizing Pierre, which you would again understand why they would be doing that, given he's the driver who's staying on. But he's really been struggling to get along with that car and hasn't been performing in the same way that Pierre has. This weekend, he obviously didn't have the same front wing upgrade, so the cars weren't exactly the same, but the feeling was still that, they weren't sure that they could rely on him going into Abu Dhabi with this particular car. And why not get Jack Doohan in early so that they can get their, shall we call it, the butterflies out of the way, or any sort of nerves that come into having your first race with a team, your first race in Formula One, full stop. So that's the great thing for Jack, is that he gets that sort of, let's say, prematurely. But at the same time, there is a world in which things don't go well at all. And then that brings a whole new wave of doubts that the team may have on Jack if things don't go well over the winter. And then does that put his seat under threat potentially? I guess that's the big question mark, and it's what we're going to get to see play out in Abu Dhabi. So let's definitely tune in to see what happens. But yeah, it's all around. It's kind of a bizarre move. I mean, big risk for Alpine, and for Jack, it's also going to be big pressure on his shoulders for his first round in Formula One.
I'm not sure, actually. I think it's actually a good move.
On which bits? You think it's a good move?
I think it's a good move all round. I actually think it's a good move all round. I think, for Alpine, it makes sense, really. Ocon, clearly that relationship had completely broken down, and, he wasn't happy. The whole thing was just a mess. Just release him, let him go off and join Haas. That's where his future is. I think, honestly, getting a weekend for Jack under his belt will be a great experience to just have in his mind over the winter, and have in his head to think about and really process. And he'll have the test, I think, after the race as well. But from the team's perspective, we've seen, haven't we, that the recent run of throwing in a Colapinto or a Lawson, people like that, sort of Ollie Behrman, these young drivers coming in a sink or swim situation, all of them have swum. And actually, that's raised the expectations for Jack. So from a team's perspective, they're going, okay, let's see what we're going to get. And Jack's got to deliver. And that's the point, right? F1 isn't a finishing school. The likes of Piastri and Verstappen before him and Leclerc and stuff, they've raised the bar of what rookies need to do. And they've just, Jack's got no choice now. You have to go in and deliver. And I think it will be good for him to get that experience at a track he knows so well. He's not, everyone's driven on there. You're going to have stable conditions. You're not going to have these weird wet and cold weekends. It's going to be stable track, stable normal weekend. I actually saw the news come out and thought, I'm actually surprised they didn't do it earlier, if I'm honest, why they didn't do it for Qatar and give him 2 weekends.
Well, that I would agree with, because then it takes off the pressure of this last race shootout for these
just
5
one,
points.
isn't it? Yeah, it's
just one. You don't really get to properly settle into it. But the fact of the matter is, the good thing for Jack is he is as ready as he's going to ever be. He's been doing a lot of work in the sim with the team. He's also been on an extensive test package. I know between races he's been flying around to get to drive. I think it's the 2022 car that he's been doing test days with. So, whatever the situation is, Jack is as prepared as he possibly is ever going to be. He did 6 FP1 sessions as well. So, everything's set up in the right way for him to perform well. But I guess all eyes will be on him to see whether he does or doesn't.
Yeah, don't forget the first race of next year is also Melbourne, which, the pressure on the Doohan name being on the grid at Melbourne will be colossal. So why not just knock off the rookie nerves, I think, in advance a little bit.
Yeah, could finish top 10, could get his points. Then we won't be having this conversation. Very good. All right, just time to tell you then about the timings for this weekend. The final race, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, we've got F1, F2 and F1 Academy. We're on air on Friday at 9 a.m. with FP1, then FP2 join us from 12:45. Saturday, FP3 on air at 10:15. Qualifying, you can join us from 1:15 for a session start of 2 o'clock, and then Sunday, all the build up from 11:30 before a lights out at 1 o'clock. Before you go, I'm going to ask you, papaya or red? Which way is the Constructors' Championship going to go? Karun?
Oh, you asked me first, so I'll say McLaren, which means Naomi has to say Ferrari now.
Would you have gone Ferrari, Naomi?
No, I mean, I think with a 21-point lead, things are going to have to go drastically wrong for McLaren in Abu Dhabi. So I'm going to say McLaren, but I am going to say that it's going to be tight because Abu Dhabi is more, it suits the Ferrari better than Qatar did. So things will be tighter. The battle's going to go right down to the end, and we're going to have a great weekend of racing.
Yeah, it's great to see a championship go down to the wire, and that is obviously the Constructors' Championship this year. Right, we're going to be back next Tuesday as always. Nico Rosberg joins us to look back at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.